Breaking: major fraud discovered in Alabama and more is pissed. When it comes to elections, crooked politicians will do whatever it takes to win. During the presidential election last year, we constantly heard incidents of voter fraud taking place, where Hillary voters were allegedly casting ballots multiple times, and buses of people were being transported into key swing state counties in order to throw the vote. With Democrats now celebrating Doug Jones' win, Republican Roy Moore is refusing to concede, after evidence of voter fraud is now being reported. Due to massive voter fraud that exists, being able to go back and recount digital votes is a very serious step to preserving the integrity of elections. But in a shocking 11th-hour order, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that counties in Alabama can destroy voting records in the Roy Moore-Doug Jones race, going against the long-standing rule that the records would be preserved. Essentially, any criminal evidence of people voting multiple times, or illegals or non-residents casting votes is now forever destroyed. TechCrunch reports. Following an 11th-hour order instructing voting officials in Alabama to keep the digital ballots generated in Tuesday's controversial Senate election, the state's Supreme Court has issued a stay to block that decision. The order to preserve the records was issued by the Montgomery County Circuit Court on Monday afternoon, less than 24 hours before voting was set to begin, in the stay that will effectively nullify that order was issued late Monday night. All counties employing digital ballot scanners in the December 12, 2017 election are hereby ordered to set their voting machines to save all processed images in order to preserve all digital ballot images, the Montgomery County order stated. The order came just hours before the votes were counted in the Moore-Jones race. Democrat Doug Jones took a commanding lead in the Senate race Tuesday night as it became clear that Mobile County was going to be the last county to come in. Mobile County, a heavily pro-Jones area, tabulated its ballots far slower than the Moore-led red counties elsewhere in the state. But this is just the beginning of the disgusting evidence emerging that there was shady things going on. Here's just a few of the alarming things that's currently raising eyebrows. 1. Fake narrative about voter suppression. It was widely predicted that blacks in Alabama would determine the outcome of the race. When the liberal media began to realize that it would be an incredibly tight race, where we saw Moore and Jones separated by less than 1% for several hours, liberals immediately began to push the false narrative that blacks were being blocked from the polling places. One of the trending stories was from fake liberal website Verified Politics was a viral story called "Something Incredibly Shady is Happening in Alabama Right Now," where they made the ridiculous claim that blacks were being prevented from voting. In the article, the website asserted that white supremacy was preventing black citizens from being able to take to the polls, that no doubt got the black populace fired up just in time to go cast their votes for Jones before the race ended. Here's a short excerpt of their ridiculous story, where they claimed that white supremacists were requiring poor blacks from being able to vote because they were required to show an ID. Alabama has a long history of suppressing the vote dating back at least to 1901 when the state passed a new constitution whose main purpose was to deny African Americans the right to vote, they whined. In 2011, the Republican-controlled state legislature passed a law that all voters must have a photo ID, which immediately disenfranchised many rural and poor blacks. 2. Liberals' army of felons. Liberals frequently use the backing of criminals to bolster their agenda, which is why they fight so hard to keep Muslim immigrants and Mexican illegals in our country. The Alabama Senate race was no different, as Breitbart exposed how George Soros and infamous race baiter Al Sharpton had their grubby talons all over this race right from the beginning, where the duo registered an army of convicted felons across Alabama to help bolster support for Jones. An organization partnered with a George Soros-financed group and led by a radical leftist who is the half-brother of the infamous controversial relevant Al Sharpton has been diligently working over the past few weeks to register convicted felons across Alabama, Breitbart began. They went on. The aim of the effort has been to get as many felons as possible on the roster before last Monday, the deadline to register in order to vote in Alabama's December 12 Senate special election that pits Republican Roy Moore against Democratic challenger Doug Jones. The man spearheading the campaign has stated outright that his effort is meant to ensure a Democratic victory in Alabama. The thousands of felons reportedly newly registered over the past few weeks were most likely not included in any recent polling on the Alabama Senate race put out by major firms. Jones himself is tied to some of the specific organizations associated with the drive to register felons here. Indeed, as Breitbart News first reported, Jones spearheaded a project for a massively Soros-financed legal activist group demanding full voting rights be given to felons released from prison, including those convicted of murder, rape and other violent crimes. 3. Dark money from very questionable sources. Whenever you smell a rat, chances are George Soros is somewhere nearby lurking about. The infamous evil billionaire, who turned his own neighbors into the Nazis in the 1940s, is constantly gunning for the destruction of America, where he's a huge donor of crooked politicians like Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and rhino Republicans like John McCain. So it should come as no surprise that Soros yet again was at the helm causing chaos and trying to throw the election in Alabama. Via Breitbart. Politico reported on Monday that the George Soros-funded Priorities USA Action and Senator Chuck Schumer's DNY Senate Majority PAC are the dark money behind the Alabama shell group that has spent more than $4.1 million to defeat conservative Republican Roy Moore in Tuesday's Alabama U.S. Senate special election in which he faces liberal Democrat Doug Jones. 4. Liberals behind the character assassination of Roy Moore. For weeks, there was an ongoing barrage of accusations made about Roy Moore, where he was even accused of pedophilia and going after several underage girls. One of Moore's accusers was Beverly Young Nelson, the ex-waitress who charged that Moore groped her when she was 16 and he was in his 30s, and used her high school yearbook bearing Moore's signature as proof that she knew him. Even though Nelson would be busted for plagiarizing the yearbook entry, liberals still used the woman's false testimony as a way to push the narrative that Moore was a sexual predator. There still has yet to be any evidence against Moore except the testimonies of these women, who conveniently crawled out of the woodwork to share their stories right before the race. It was even discovered that George Soros was behind the hit research of Moore, and was encouraging these women to speak out against the Republican judge. Yesterday was an enormous hit to the Republican Party. Jones' victory will have significant consequences for Republicans on the national level. Democrats' goal now is to capture the last Senate seat up for grabs next year in order to gain the majority in the Senate.